I'm a female, and when I was 18 years old, I had a friend who became very ill and couldn't go to school anymore for some months. To make things easier for her once she would come back, I agreed to give her private lessons, and I copied math problems for her to solve. For the day of our first appointment, she drew a little map for me, since I've never been at her village before and the way to her house seemed to be complicated. No problem, I thought, when I got off the train and looked at the map. Besides me, there was another boy who went off the train at that station, and we went both in the same direction. My eyes fixated on the paper. I crossed roads and followed a pedestrian path to a school building. It was only then that I noticed that the boy from before was still ahead of me, but I didn't give it any thought. When both of us took the road around the school building, I found it a funny coincidence that we seemingly went to the same neighborhood, but still didn't think much about it. I concentrated on the map again to figure out where to go next. When I looked up again, I noticed that he gave me a quick, skeptical glance over his shoulders and hastily looked away again. Then he started to walk faster than he did before. His reaction perplexed me for a moment because that's something I would expect from a woman on a lonely street during the night and not from a boy who is at least a head taller than me. I didn't even wear a hoodie that day or any other clothing that could make me look suspicious. Therefore, I came to the conclusion that I was probably mistaken in terms of his cautious behavior and concentrated on the map once more. Ironically, the map led me to the same road as him again, and his glances became more and more obvious. I wished for my friend's home to turn up pretty quickly to put an end to this bizarre situation, but when I arrived at the neighborhood, the situation became even more awkward. He headed toward her house as well. Before he went inside, he looked at me over his shoulders, saw that I moved towards the house, and hurried to go inside and slam the door behind him. I don't know what he thought when I rang the doorbell right after. He probably thought I was a crazy stalker who even had the nerve to follow him to his house. The door was flung open, and he yelled at me, asking me what I wanted. Embarrassed, I answered in a very squeaky voice that I was there to see his sister and tried to give him an apologetic smile, which probably looked very awkward. He just stared at me in disbelief, even after my friend came to bring me to her room. I told her the story, and we could still laugh about it, but her brother still avoided me during every one of my visits. If you're reading this, dear brother of my friend, I'm really sorry that I unintentionally creeped you out that day, but I can assure you, I'm truly not a stalker. I'm a 23-year-old male at the time of this story. Sometimes when I go a long time without talking to anyone, my voice comes out quite weird when I finally do talk. Most of the time I remember to clear my throat or something, but sometimes I'll just start talking and it will sound weird. So one such occasion, I was riding the metro home to College Park, Maryland. I worked in DC at the time, and my ride home was usually around an hour. On the train, there was a cute girl. I try not to constantly look at girls on the train because I don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. It seemed though like every time I did glance at the girl, she looked right back at me immediately afterward. I was hoping that she kept looking at me because she thought I was cute or something too, but was worried that due to the coincidence that every time she checked to see if I was looking at her, I was, and that it seemed like I was just constantly staring at her. I finally got to my stop around 11 p.m. I was the only person that got off the train at the stop, except for the cute girl. At the College Park metro station, there was a large parking garage where I had parked my car. I had gone to work late in the day, so my car was parked on the 4th floor. I got onto the elevator and noticed the cute girl was already in it with me. She pressed the number 2. I thought to myself that she must be extremely lazy or tired to take the elevator one floor. As if she read my mind, she answered saying, "It's not that I'm lazy, it's just that the stairs can be pretty scary at night." Now this is where my inactive throat thing comes in, and trust me when I say I have absolutely no idea why I said this. I turned to her and said in a very gargly low voice, "This elevator can be a pretty scary place sometimes too." And then kind of got a tickle in my throat and started clearing it, but it could have sounded like grunting. At that moment, the elevator got to her floor, and she just booked it. If you're out there, cute girl, I had no intention of doing anything to you that night, and I'm very, very sorry. This happened a few hours ago. Upon waking up and thinking about it, I realized that I most likely just scared the crap out of some poor old man. To start though, you have to understand the situation I recently found myself in. My beloved cat, we'll call him Billy, went missing about 2 weeks ago. I've plastered my neighborhood in posters, begging for anyone who sees him to contact me. Today, after weeks of silence, I got a call from a woman claiming to have spotted Billy by the graveyard behind my house. So, naturally, I got dressed and headed out to search for him. But again, some background information is needed. This weekend I came down with an awful cold. I've been sick for a few days and my nose has gotten so dry, sometimes it just pours blood. My hair is matted and my voice currently sounds like a transgendered Shirley Temple. My fever has me constantly drenched in sweat, so overall, I'm a mess. After walking the perimeter of the graveyard and my neighborhood, I decided to walk through the graveyard and search for him there. So I strolled in, calling, "Billy!" over and over again. As I got deeper into the cemetery, I came across a car. It seemed to be some old man who was dropping off flowers for someone. I just kept walking, calling out for my missing cat. As I got closer to the man, I noticed he was staring at me and backing away. I found his behavior kind of strange, but being sick, exhausted, and solely focused on finding my cat, I ignored it and just kept walking. As soon as I passed him, though, I heard a car door slam. And by the time I turned around to see if he was okay, he was speeding out of the cemetery. I finished my walk, went home, and fell asleep. It was only upon waking up that I realized how creepy that must have been for the old man. He was dropping off flowers in a secluded graveyard in the middle of the afternoon when some girl, drenched in sweat with matted hair and blood dripping out of her nose, starts coming towards him, yelling, "Billy, come Billy." Over and over again with a voice so deep she sounds like a demon. So to the man I creeped out in the graveyard today, let's meet sometime so I can try and explain what just happened. This was maybe 5 years ago in college. My 3 friends and I were all at the bars doing whatever. We were 4 normal-looking guys. It must not have been super fun because we all decided to leave. It was probably around midnight, not super late. There were plenty of people still in the bars and should have been at least some people or cars on the back road, though I can't remember noticing any. The way back from the bar to the campus is pretty much a straight shot up a hill past a few shops. We make a sharp left out of the bar and we see this guy who looked pretty angry. I don't think he noticed us because he was too busy beating the crap out of a green electrical box. We stopped to watch. I'm not about to get close to a guy thrashing an inanimate object like that. He kicked the box so hard that one of the hinges pops the metal cover loose and he falls right on his butt. We laugh and may have been close enough for him to hear us, but I like to think he didn't hear. We keep our distance of 2 to 3 light posts behind him. Then he starts walking up the hill back to campus. At this point we're thinking, well, that's the way we gotta go and we don't want to catch up to that guy. I suggest that we should just maintain the same distance and coincidentally follow him home, or at least to the point where he has to take a turn somewhere we don't. So we start following this guy up the hill. The whole time he is very, very, very angry. He's mumbling and kind of growling to himself. I'm guessing he probably just broke up with a girl or maybe saw her cheating on him or something like that. As he was angrily walking, he would periodically stop to beat something up like a light post. He may have looked back at us once or twice. When he stopped, we stopped and just kept an eye on him. He walked past a closed shop and couldn't help but try to intimidate his reflection in the window. He pump-faked a few punches. Again, he stopped to do this so we could stop to watch him. We walked a little further, and then he decided to actually commit to physically and metaphorically beating himself up and punch a window with his reflection in it. He hurts his hand and then turns to look at us since we had some sort of noisy reaction to that. We're not close enough for him to confront, but we're not far enough for him to think we didn't see that. We're about halfway up the hill at this point. This is where the fear starts sinking in. He begins to start looking back at us more frequently. Same deal though, if he stops, we stop. We talk about how we're not afraid of this guy. It's 4 against 1, and he's obviously out of it. We decide he's not a threat and just keep doing what we've been doing. We know it's creepy, but what else are we going to do? He never yells at us or comes towards us. In his head, he must have known that he can't go confront 4 guys who've been following him this whole time. He turns around and picks up his walking pace. We pick up our walking pace to keep up. He looks back and sees this and goes into a good power walk. We match his pace again. I'm certain at this point that he thinks we're going to mug him. We're almost up the hill and to the left is some housing. Maybe he lives in that neighborhood because he takes a hard left. We don't live in that neighborhood and need to go straight a little longer, but I'm like, you know what, guys? Let's just turn up here and see what he does. We do. He's standing down the street watching to see what we do, probably hoping we just walk by and then reassure himself he was just being paranoid. Unfortunately, he sees us, makes a turn towards him. He goes into an all-out sprint away from us, cutting through yards, and disappears. It was fun while it lasted, but we weren't going to go sprinting after this scared guy, and we just continued on our way home. When I read the stories here, most have generally creepy dudes, but maybe sometimes that atmosphere is what's really creepy. Every now and again I think back on this guy and wonder if he thought he was going to get robbed or something worse that night and how he narrowly escaped. Nope, just some jerks having fun while walking home. I'm a white male, age 22. I live in the country. Basically nothing important goes on around me. I live with my wife and her father in a quaint little house painted on the back roads. This story takes place before I ever met my wife, before I had even thought of finding her. I had a terrible best friend who was not terrible at the time. He was stealing my stuff from behind my back, and that's another story for another day. As I said before, this guy was my best friend, and I his. I was also a useless bit of existence in this stage of my life. I worked at a call center, came home to smoke and eat, and repeated it the next day. For a time before, I didn't even have a job, and would just lounge around the house and hang out with my best friend. It was in this period of time that this story takes place. I do believe me and Johnny had just gotten done smoking a J, and we were doing something related to that. Either we had just gone down to spend our last $1.50, us both not having jobs, on Polar Pops, giant sugary drinks for 69 cents because we had cotton mouth, or we had gotten some food from McDonald's because we had the munchies, or we had just gotten a 10 sack because all we did was smoke. Anyway, anyone who knows about living in the country would tell you that almost every back road intersects with every other back road. As such, me and my friend had memorized all of the roads around our area. There were at least 50 ways to get back to our house from the closest town or city, and we were very familiar with all of them. Why wouldn't you remember when all you do is smoke and cruise all day? Anyways, I can't remember if it was a guy or a girl, a truck or a car, but someone had made me mad. Late at night, coming back to our house, we had pulled out of a parking lot, and someone immediately from the opposite side cut me off and went right in front of me. I was never one to road rage. I always thought to myself, what if they had a gun? I can't take that risk, and it is why I tell my wife to suppress her heavy road rage just for safety. I grew red in the face and could not hold it in anymore. Luck having it, I was going the exact same way he was going, and as I told you, there's 50 million ways to get back to my house from this town. So, instead of blaring my horn, I just tailgated him. I made sure I stayed close enough to shove my headlights down his eye holes, and I followed him every single turn. It added about 5 minutes to my travel time. I'm pretty sure he knew. It looked like he was going out of his way. I probably followed him for about a half an hour. He just seemed to take all the roads we were going through by chance. At first, it was out of anger. I would only do it for a couple of streets, and that would be that. Shine my headlights on him because he almost caused me to flip into a ditch. Seriously, you couldn't wait 10 seconds to go after me. How screwed is that? Thinking back, I'm sure he was in a truck. I was in a Cavalier. People out here with their trucks drive like morons and act like they're the only ones on the road, and I was sick of it. But a couple of streets turned into about 9 or 10. He lived really close to my home, about 10 minutes away. Honestly, it just turned into a game. Me and Johnny agreed that as long as he turns down a street that we can also technically take to go home, not backtracking, then we would also follow him. He or she probably noticed too. They would speed up, veer around the corner, and would veer up after that. If they ever got out, what was I even going to say? Probably just flip them off and tell them they were idiots and almost made me wreck. Anyway, they never did stop, but eventually ended up going in the opposite direction we were going. Me and Johnny thought it was hilarious, and we talked about it for the rest of the night while smoking and eating some really good food, I think. I'm not particularly sorry for what I did. I do feel guilty because if it would have happened to me, I would have been scared out of my mind. But I also would not go and cut someone off going 45 and almost causing their car to go off the road. I have more respect than that, although maybe this story says otherwise. If those people were generally fearful for their life, I am sorry, but you should learn how to drive better. At the very least, by the actions I observed that night, I don't think they felt guilty or fearful at all. They knew what they were doing when they cut me off, and they knew I was riding them and following them because they were a terrible driver. And for those of you who claim I'm an awful person or something that's the degree, well, that's just your opinion, man. I'm not going to tell you I'm a good or bad guy. You can make that decision for yourself. We all do stupid things. This happened when I was either 17 or 18. I was technically the creep in this situation, even though I never meant any harm. Before I begin this story, I need to point out that I have a few minor mental disabilities, so sometimes I can't read a situation for what it is until it's too late. God knows I've suffered for that multiple times in my life. I used to work at a grocery store. It was rather large, so I had quite a few coworkers I barely knew. One day, I was working a rush when I saw a woman talking with one of my coworkers, who I'll call Mike. They seemed to know each other rather well, and I could have sworn I recognized her from one of the departments, so I assumed she was a coworker on maternity leave. The reason I say maternity leave is because she was holding a baby boy who looked like he was just a few weeks old. The woman came to my register to ring up her groceries when she was done talking to Mike. I greeted the woman with a smile and asked her the typical questions like, "How are you? Do you want this in a bag?" I looked again at the baby she was still cradling. I've always been good at taking care of kids and have helped out at camps, daycares, and regular babysitting jobs countless times in the past, so I asked the typical questions about her baby as well, like, "What's his name? How old is he?" When I finished ringing her up, I told her to have a good day, and that was that. I later found out from Mike that she wasn't a coworker at all, just a regular at the store. I figured that was okay. There were a lot of those, several of which I knew, and she seemed nice enough. I saw her shopping with her family quite often after that, and like with every regular I knew, I always offered a smile and a wave when I saw them. One Saturday, I had just finished my shift and was walking out the door to my car when my mom called me and asked me to pick up some hot dogs. They were all the way at the back of the store and I was at the front, but I rolled my eyes and began to walk back the way I had come. I cut through one of the aisles to get there faster, and I came across a group of 4 people taking up the entire aisle. I recognized them as the woman and her family. I didn't want to bother them, so I tried my best to walk around them. But they were going incredibly slow, and no matter what direction I tried to go, I couldn't get around them. Looking back, I probably should have just turned around and walked through a different aisle, but I got to the hot dogs before that even crossed my mind. The family resumed walking, and I got the hot dogs, paid for them, and left the store. I worked again the next day, and, of course, the woman and her family came to shop again. I smiled and waved like always and continued to work. About 20 minutes later, my manager asked if he could talk to me. I didn't think much of it, thinking he just needed my help with cleaning the bathrooms or something, and I followed him to the back room. When we got there, my supervisor was there too, and I was instantly confused and nervous. To make a long story short, they told me that a woman had reported me for stalking her and trying to hurt her baby. I still remember feeling like I had just been slapped in the face, as I knew instantly who they were talking about, even though I had never laid a hand on the woman or her baby. I explained my side of the situation, also making sure to mention the events of the day before when I was shopping. Luckily, I had known both my manager and the supervisor ever since I had started working at the store, so they believed me and chalked it up to the woman simply misreading the situation. The rest of that day, I felt like I was going to throw up. I had come close to losing my job and been accused of being a criminal, and I was technically still a kid. Even though I had been assured by my managers and later my parents that I had done nothing wrong, I still spent a few good months after that constantly fearing that someone else with a baby would think of me in that way, to the point where I couldn't even look at another child. I've since gotten over those feelings, but over the years I've learned to be more careful with what I say or do. Luckily, for the rest of the time I worked in that store, I never saw that woman or her family again. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r Let's Read Official, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear it featured here on the channel. And join my Discord to interact with me directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.